When did you cut ties with your own sibling? When my brother sold the recording of our mother's last words to a podcast, for content, for engagement, for the specific currency of the internet that converts grief into clicks and clicks into revenue, and revenue into a man who monetized his dying mother's voice without asking the woman or the family if the voice was his to sell. My mother died in April, pancreatic cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the morning, I sat in a hospital room holding her hand and feeling the hand stop being a hand and start being a memory. She was 61. She was a librarian. She spent 34 years recommending books to people who needed stories, and the recommending was her gift, and the gift was quiet, and the quiet was the thing she valued most, because she said once, the best things happen in rooms where nobody is performing. My brother Kyle was at the hospital. He was present the way Kyle is always present, physically, visibly, and with a phone. Kyle runs a podcast, true life stories, human interest, emotional content. He has 92,000 subscribers. He built the audience by telling personal stories, his divorce, his recovery from addiction, his relationship with our father. Each story mined from his own life and refined into content that sounds raw and feels produced, and the production is what Kyle calls authenticity, and what I call a man who has learned to convert his pain into a product, and the product requires a supply chain, and the supply chain is his family. Kyle recorded our mother's last day, not on a professional setup, on his phone, a voice memo. He told me he was recording for the family. He said, I want to have her voice, for us, so we can hear her whenever we need to. I believed him because the sentence sounded like grief, and grief sentences get a pass through security, and the pass allowed the phone into the room. My mother said things in her last hours, not public things, not content. She said my name, she said Kyle's name, she said our father's name, which she hadn't spoken in 12 years because our father left when we were teenagers, and the not speaking of his name was the boundary she maintained. She said, tell your father I forgive him. She said it to me, to Kyle, to the room that contained 2 sons and a phone and a woman whose voice was leaving her body one sentence at a time. She died at 4:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. Kyle and I held each other in the hallway. We cried. Kyle held his phone. 2 months later, Kyle released an episode of his podcast. The title was My Mother's Last Words, A Journey Through Loss. I found out because a friend sent me a link. She said, I think you should hear this. I pressed play. The episode opened with Kyle narrating. He described the hospital room. He described the light. He described me sitting in the chair holding our mother's hand. Then he played the recording, her voice, my mother's voice, saying my name, saying Kyle's name, saying our father's name, saying, tell your father I forgive him. The sentence she said in a hospital room at 3 a.m. to 2 sons, who were the only audience she intended, and which was now playing through earbuds and car speakers for 92,000 subscribers, who had no relationship to my mother and no claim to her voice. The runtime was 47 minutes. There was an ad break at minute 22 for a mattress company. My mother's last words were interrupted by a mattress ad. I called Kyle. I said, you put mom's voice on your podcast. He said, it's the most beautiful episode I've ever made. I said, it's not an episode. It's her death. He said, it's a story about love and loss and forgiveness. 92,000 people heard her forgive dad. That's powerful. I said, you told me the recording was for the family. He said, it is for the family, the podcast family, the community. They are not part of our story. They are an audience. An audience is not a family. An audience consumes. A family holds. The difference is the mattress ad at minute 22. I said, take it down. He said, I can't. It has 200,000 downloads. It's my most successful episode. Most successful. My mother's death is his most successful episode. I said, Kyle, mom said, the best things happen in rooms where nobody is performing. Her last room had you in it with a phone. The phone was performing. She didn't know. He said, she would have wanted people to hear her message. I said, she wanted US to hear it. She said it to US in a room at 3 a.m. with the door closed. The door was closed for a reason. The reason was privacy. And you opened the door and sold tickets. He didn't take it down. I stopped calling. I stopped texting. I stopped being in the audience of a man who converts family into content. I tried to grieve after that. I tried to do what my mother would have done, which was close the door and sit in the quiet. I lasted 4 days. On the 4th day, Emmeline sent me a text. Emmeline is a friend of mine, someone who knew my mother, someone who had been at the funeral and stood in the back and didn't post about it. Her text was a screenshot, then another, Kyle's social media. He had posted about the overwhelming response to the episode. He used words like humbled and grateful. And then, at the bottom of the 3rd screenshot, a sentence that made me put my phone down and press my hands flat on the table. The sentence was, more of mom's story coming soon. More. As if the story were a series. As if the dying and the forgiving and the last breath at 4:17 a.m. on a Wednesday were not the whole thing but the pilot episode, and the pilot had tested well. I sat there looking at those words, and I understood something I hadn't understood when I stopped calling Kyle. I thought cutting contact was enough, but I wasn't the supply chain. My mother was. And my mother couldn't say no anymore. A few days later, I went to my mother's house. The house smelled like her, which is the thing they don't tell you about grief, that the smell stays longer than the person. I started going through her things. I think I was looking for her. I found her in a journal. It was in the drawer of her nightstand, underneath a bookmark and a pair of reading glasses. The journal was small, blue, and filled with her handwriting. I sat on her bed and opened the journal. I found it on a page near the middle. She had written about Kyle's podcast. She had written about him asking to tell the family's story on his show. And she had written, in her neat librarian handwriting, the following words. Kyle asked to tell our story on his show. I told him some rooms are not stages. He said he understood. I don't think he did. I read it 3 times. Some rooms are not stages. She told him. She used those exact words. She said it to Kyle directly. And Kyle said he understood. And my mother, who knew her sons the way librarians know books, wrote, I don't think he did. I took a picture of the page. This was the proof. My mother didn't want her life turned into content. She said it. She said it clearly. And Kyle heard it and said he understood and then walked into a hospital room with a phone. I called Kyle one more time. He picked up on the 3rd ring. His voice was careful, the way it always is when he knows a conversation might become content. I said, I found mom's journal. Silence. I said, she wrote about you asking to put her on the podcast. podcast. She said no. She told you some rooms are not stages. You recorded her anyway. The silence got longer. Then he said, she didn't mean the hospital. That was different. She was saying goodbye. That belongs to everyone who loved her. I said, 92,000 strangers did not love her, Kyle. He hung up. The days after that phone call were strange. The anger didn't stay the way I expected it to. It softened, not into forgiveness, but into doubt, which is worse because forgiveness has a shape and doubt is just fog. Emmeline called me one evening, and her voice wasn't worried this time. It was careful. She said, I've been reading the comments under Kyle's episode. She said, there's a woman who said she lost her mother 2 years ago and never got to hear her say goodbye, and hearing your mom's voice made her feel like she got a piece of that. There's a man who said he hasn't spoken to his father in 9 years, and the forgiveness part made him pick up the phone for the first time since his dad left. She paused. Then she said, maybe he did something good by accident. And I sat with that. The thing about grief is that it makes you unsure of your own judgment. And Emmeline wasn't wrong. The comments were real. The people were real. I almost let it go. I was 3/4 of the way to letting it go when Emmeline called again. It was a Tuesday, late. Her voice was different, tight. She said, Kyle just posted a teaser for a new episode. She said, it's called The Father She Forgave, Part 2. She kept going. He's using old voicemails from your mom. There are clips of her voice that sound like they're from her phone, like messages she left him over the years. And there's something else. She stopped. I could hear her breathing. I said, what else? She said, there's a clip of your voice in it. You're on the phone with him, and it sounds like a private conversation. You're crying. You're saying you weren't ready. You're saying you thought you'd have more time. Did you know he was recording you? I did not know. The clip was from a phone call I made to Kyle the week after our mother died. I remember the call. I remember where I was standing, which was at home, in the dark, which was the only place I could go because the dark didn't have photos of her on the walls, and the not having photos made it safe enough to break down. I called Kyle because he was my brother, and our mother had just died, and I needed to say the things you say to the only other person on the planet who lost the same woman you lost. I said I wasn't ready. I said I thought she'd make it to Christmas. I said I kept reaching for my phone to call her, and then remembering, and the remembering was like falling every single time. I said those things to my brother, on a phone call, with the basic human understanding that a brother is not a microphone, and a phone call is not a recording session. Kyle recorded it. I found the teaser. I played it. I heard my own voice, and the hearing was like being outside my own body. I heard myself breaking. I heard the cracks in my voice. I heard the pauses where I was trying not to sob and failing. Then the teaser cut to Kyle's voice. Kyle narrating. Kyle said, my brother doesn't want me to share this story, but some stories are bigger than one person's comfort. Bigger than one person's comfort. That's what Kyle called it. My grief, my private words, my voice breaking in the dark at midnight, reduced to one person's comfort and weighed against the story, and the story won because the story always wins in Kyle's world. Something changed in me after I heard that teaser. The doubt Emmeline had planted, the almost letting go, the fog I'd been walking through, it burned off, all at once. This was not about one recording anymore. This was Kyle deciding that the family's pain belonged to him, all of it. I realized something that sat in my chest like a stone. Every conversation I'd had with Kyle since our mother died was potentially recorded. Every phone call, every voicemail. Kyle's phone was not a phone. It was a collection device, and I had been feeding it. I called Hassan. Hassan is my oldest friend. He knew my mother. He came to the library every other week for 15 years, and my mother saved books for him behind the counter. I said, he recorded me crying about mom. I called him the week she died, and he recorded the whole thing. He's putting it in an episode. Hassan was quiet. The quiet of someone who already knows. Then he said, then stop asking him to do the right thing. He's already shown you he won't. What are you going to do about it? I didn't answer Hassan. The knowing hadn't finished forming yet. 2 days later, the full size arrived. Emmeline sent me another screenshot. This one was from Kyle's social media, a post with a photo of 2 microphones facing each other across a table. The caption read, honored to welcome a very special guest to the show for part 2. Some stories need more than one voice to be told fully. This one needed a voice I never thought I'd hear again. She didn't have to tell me who the guest was. I knew. The way you know a sound before you hear it. Kyle had contacted Josephson, our father, the man who left when I was 15 and Kyle was 13, the man whose name my mother didn't say for 12 years, the man she forgave at 3 a.m. in a hospital room. Kyle had found him. Kyle had reached out to him. Kyle had told him about the episode, about the forgiveness, and Kyle had invited him onto the podcast to talk about it. I hadn't spoken to Josephson in over a decade. I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't called in so many years that I almost didn't recognize it. Josephson, my father. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. His voice was older. Of course it was older, but part of me expected him to sound the same as the man who left, and the not sounding the same meant time had passed for him too. And the passing of time for a man who left you is something that doesn't make sense because in your head he's frozen at the door, always leaving, never aging. Hello? He said. I said, it's me. There was a pause. Then he said my name. He said it the way you say a word you've been practicing in your head but never expected to say out loud. The conversation was stiff. Then Josephson said, Kyle reached out. He told me your mother forgave me. I just want to hear it. I want to talk about it. He said you were involved in the episode too. Involved. Kyle told our father I was involved. As if the recording of me sobbing in the dark was involvement. As if having your grief stolen and turned into a teaser was participation. I said, I wasn't involved. Kyle recorded mom without telling us what it was for. He recorded me without my permission. And now he's bringing you on to make it a bigger story. The silence on the other end of the line had weight to it. Then he said, I just wanted to know she forgave me. And his voice broke on the word forgave, the way a branch breaks. Not clean, not all the way through. I closed my eyes. I held the phone against my ear and I said, she did. She said it to us. In a room. That was supposed to be enough. The conversation ended shortly after that. Not with a fight. With the kind of quiet that happens when two people realize they're standing on opposite sides of something. I put the phone down. Kyle had turned our mother's forgiveness into a thing Josephson could only get through the podcast. Kyle had made himself the gatekeeper. The forgiveness happened in a hospital room between a dying woman and her 2 sons, and Kyle took it and locked it inside his platform. Kyle had weaponized a dying woman's last act act of love. I tried the other routes. I want you to know that. I went to the hosting platform. I filed a complaint. The response came 3 days later. It was a form letter. It said the content had been reviewed and did not violate their terms of service. Hassan gave me the number of a lawyer he knew. The lawyer was patient. He listened. Then he told me what I didn't want to hear. He said the legal options were limited. My mother didn't sign a release, but Kyle was in the room. The phone call Kyle recorded of me was murkier. Recording laws depend on where you are. The lawyer said we could fight it. He said it would be slow. He said it would be expensive. He said the outcome was not certain. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in my mother's house and I counted the days. 5 days until the follow-up episode dropped. I had no legal leverage. I had no platform. I had no audience. I had a journal entry and a screenshot. I called Hassan. I told him where things stood. 5 days. No legal options. Hassan listened. Then he said, "You can't beat him in his world, so stop playing in his world. What does Kyle need more than anything?" I sat with the question. I turned it over the way my mother turned over a book before she recommended it, and I found the answer. His audience, I said. He needs them to trust him. He needs them to believe he's the honest one. So I didn't go to Kyle's platform. I didn't make a public statement. I called him, and I said, "You want my voice in it anyway, so let me say what I have to say. Record it. Put it in. You want authenticity? Let me be authentic." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought he'd hung up. Then Kyle made a sound, a breath that was half laugh and half something I hadn't heard from him in a long time, which was surprise. He said, "That's all I ever wanted, for us to share this together." He agreed. We scheduled the recording for 2 days before the episode was supposed to drop. Then I prepared. I gathered my mother's journal. I saved the screenshot of Kyle's post where he wrote, "Some stories are bigger than one person's comfort." I bookmarked the page where Roberta wrote, "Some rooms are not stages." And then I picked up the phone and called Josephson, my father, for the second time in over a decade. I said, "I'm going to tell the truth on Kyle's show. The truth about how the recording happened. The truth about mom saying no. I want you to hear it from me first." Josephson listened. He didn't interrupt. Then he said, "Your mother was the most private person I ever knew, and I failed her in a lot of ways. But I'm not going to fail her by helping someone sell her voice. Tell Kyle I'm not doing the episode." I asked him to call Kyle directly, to say it himself, and he did. The call from Kyle came less than an hour later. His voice was different. The Polish was gone. The narrator was gone. What was left was a man watching his plan come apart. He said, "Dad pulled out. He said you talked to him. What did you say?" I said, "I told him the truth. The same truth I'm going to tell on your podcast." Kyle said, "What truth?" I said, "That mom said no. That she wrote it in her journal. That you recorded her after she told you her life was not your content. That you recorded me without my knowledge. That you turned a hospital room into a recording studio and a dying woman's voice into a revenue stream. And I'm going to read her journal entry on your podcast. In her words, not yours." Kyle's voice went tight. He said, "You can't do that on my show. That's not how it works. I control the edit." I said, "Then don't air it. Cancel the episode. Take down the original. Delete the recordings. And I'll never say a word about this to anyone." He said, "You're blackmailing me." I said, "No. Mom said some rooms are not stages. I'm just closing the door you opened." There was a long silence. Long enough that I could hear the house around me settling. Then Kyle said, "If I take it down, I lose everything. My numbers, my momentum. The audience expects it." I said, "And if you don't take it down, your audience hears the journal entry. They hear that your mother explicitly said no. They hear that you recorded your brother crying without his consent. They hear that the authenticity is a man who ignores his dying mother's boundaries for downloads. What do you think that does to your numbers, Kyle?" Another silence. Then quiet, almost small. He said, "You would do that to me?" And I said, "You already did it to her." Kyle took down the original episode that night. He canceled the follow-up. He sent me a text that said, "You don't understand what I was trying to do." I didn't respond. I sat in my mother's house, in her reading chair, the one by the window where she used to sit with a book and a cup of tea and the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full. I held her journal. I opened it to a random page. She had written a list of her favorite quiet things: rain on library windows, the sound of someone turning a page, the way her sons laughed when they forgot anyone was listening. I closed the journal. The room was quiet. Nobody was performing. A week later, I drove to Josephson's apartment. I brought nothing with me except the forgiveness my mother gave in a hospital room at 3 a.m., the forgiveness she whispered to 2 sons, the forgiveness that was meant to travel from her mouth to his ears through us, not through microphones and platforms. I sat across from my father in a small room with the door closed, and I told him what she said. I said it the way she said it, which was simply and without performance. Josephson cried. I sat with him until the crying stopped. No phone, no recording, no one watching. Just a son delivering a message from a woman who knew that some things are too important to be content. Kyle and I don't speak. I don't know if we ever will. But the recordings are gone. My mother's voice is back in the room where it belonged, and the room is quiet, the way she wanted it.